Well, brethren, welcome all tonight. Greetings to brethren and to guests. My name is Robert Billing, and I want to welcome you all today on behalf of the Blue Lounge Social Club. The Blue Lounge Social Club is about grassroots Freemasonry, particularly our younger and newer brothers. We provide opportunities for fellowship, for learning, and for supporting each other. We're also advocates for improvement to ensure the future of our fraternity. Someone needs to be muted. Now, this new education series, Beyond Craft Freemasonry, aims to shine a light on the many paths available to a brother beyond the 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge. Now, many brethren will only ever join the Blue Lodge, the craft. Some may choose to wait, like I did, until after becoming a worshipful master of their lodge. And some may wish to join everything as soon as they possibly can. And look, the choice is yours. And this series will help you make that decision. Now, your host for this evening is going to be Brother Kane Ord. And Kane, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Rob. And let me take this opportunity to thank you all for taking your taking time out of your very busy schedule to sit with this tonight and hopefully learn a thing or two. I always really enjoy these sorts of seminars or lectures or whatever you want to call them, because there's always such a great mix of sort of newer Masons or younger Masons, newer Masons, whatever you want to call us, and also really experienced brethren who can sort of share their knowledge and their experience and take us through the ropes, which is always so great. So yeah, as Rob said, tonight we're sort of kicking off a new series run through the Blue Lounge Social Club, and that will really be focusing on, what is on offer for brethren beyond sort of the Blue Lodge or beyond Craft Masonry. And this is I suppose a little bit experimental in the sense that we're trying to cover quite a lot of stuff in very little amount of time. So look, we'll just have to see how it goes. So tonight in particular, it's my pleasure to sort of introduce you all to 3 distinguished brethren in particular. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I didn't go through and double check sort of everyone's rank. And so I will just refer to brother. So perhaps if people want to sort of throw in their rank and all the postnomials afterwards. But as I was saying, I have the distinct privilege and pleasure to invite along tonight Brother Bill Jones, who is going to be speaking to the Mark and also the Royal Ark Mariners. Also Brother Barry Minster, who's going to be speaking to the Holy Royal Arch. And also I personally think very sort of exciting opportunity. We have Rico Torres, who will be speaking, or Brother Rico, who will be speaking to Demolay, Australia, in particular. So yeah, I think tonight's a really good opportunity to sort of see the 2 ends of craft Freemasonry, so we can see sort of what's on offer for the younger brethren, those that are not yet old enough to join sort of regular Freemasonry, and then also what are the sort of immediate steps available to people sort of straight after the first 3 degrees. So yeah, I think just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. We'll have the 4 presentations from our speakers, and that should take us through to about 8:30. And then we're going to have an opportunity for people to do a bit of a question and answer sort of in the last half an hour or so. So please, as the speakers or the presenters are speaking, think of some questions, write them down. I think it would be good to sort of save them up until the end. So with that, I would like to.
Wait, I don't want.
I would like to invite Brother Bill Jones to step forward and take us through Mark Masonry.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Kane. I'm the Deputy Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of Victoria, and by definition I'm also the Deputy Grand Commander of the Royal Ark Mariners in Victoria and Tasmania. So we have a Mark and a Mariners Lodge in Hobart that are part of our constitution. So Tasmanians, good to see you here. Brethren, I'll make a couple of general comments before I start, and they relate to comments made in the introductions about what you can do while you're young. I joined Freemasonry when I was 18 and a half. I was in my first grand team in the Mark degree when I was 26, having gone through the chair of my Mark Lodge before I went through the chair of the craft. Now, I got married the year I was in my second grand team, and by the time I stepped back from Freemasonry to look after family and career matters, I was in my mid-30s, and I'd already been through 5 chairs and been in 3 separate degrees of grand teams and 5 years in grand teams. Now, what's the message in that? You can take Freemasonry when you need it. You can step back if you need to for your career and your personal and family reasons, and then you can re-engage at a higher level later on when the circumstances allow you. I never thought that I'd be able to step back from Freemasonry and then become the Grand Master in waiting 30 years later, but I'm living proof that you can do it. So Freemasonry is something you do at your own pace. And I think that's an important point to make. You go as far as you want to go, at the rate that you want to progress, and in the directions you want to choose. So I'm going to talk to you about Mark Masonry and later about the Royal Ark Mariners. Most Freemasons in Victoria will know that there are 5 degrees in Craft Masonry, and that appears in the Book of Constitutions of the Craft, the Mark and the Chapter as Rule 2 in all of them. And it says that we have a 1st, 2nd and 3rd degree of Mark Master Mason, and the Supreme Order of Holy Royal Arch in this state. Mark Masonry is a separate constitution in Victoria. We are one of very few Mark constitutions that are completely separate from any other order in the world. So we have the Grand Lodge of England, the Grand Lodge of Greece, the Grand Lodge of Brazil, Grand Lodge of Southeast Asia. These are all lodges of Mark Master Masons. The Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of South Australia and the Northern Territory, Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of Queensland, and the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of the Congo, Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons reformed in France, and the very soon to be erected Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of Italy. And there are others in Finland and other places, but there are not many. In most parts of the world, the Mark degree is worked either as part of the Holy Royal Arch Constitution, or in cases where Scotland has been the mother lodge, often in craft lodges. So what can I tell you about Mark Masonry? Those of you who are already engaged in Freemasonry will know that the narrative is the building of King Solomon's Temple. We have the 3 great leaders in that process. Hiram Abiff, King of Tyre, and King Solomon are the people in the narrative. We add a further person in that narrative, and his name is Adoniram. And if you listen when you go to a craft installation, you'll hear Adoniram mentioned twice. So next time that happens, if you're in a craft lodge at an installation, have a listen for him. And we tell you a little bit more about that story. The Mark degree also has an operative feel to it. So as a new member joining the mark degree, you will take part in a ceremony which is not unlike the sort of ceremony that a stonemason would go through as part of his developing his skills in stonemasonry. So it has an operative feel, it has a feel of the new joining member, the candidate on the night, playing an important active part in the ceremony, not just being led around as happens in the craft. It's a further extension of what we do in Freemasonry. The history of mark masonry goes back to the early 1500s, when there are references to masons being given marks. So they were given a mark to help them identify themselves and their work in the various guilds and organisations that they worked in. And we have the first use of the mark ceremony occurring in the 1700s. So it's quite an old ceremony. It's not something that has grown out of the craft. It grew independently originally. I said earlier that in Victoria we have our own constitution. In other states, New South Wales and Western Australia particularly, the mark degree is worked in the Holy Royal Arch. So there are a whole range of ways that you can acquire this degree of a Mark Master Mason. How do we manage the degree? Well, we have a Grand Secretary, the same as the craft has a Grand Secretary. He happens in Victoria also to be the Grand Scribe of Supreme Grand Chapter and also the Grand Scribe of the Royal Ark Mariners. His name is Wayne Smith. Some of you will know Wayne quite well, I'm sure. He's a well-known Freemason in this state. We have really close fraternal ties with Craft Masonry in Victoria. Our leadership team meets with the leadership team of Grand Craft regularly. The Grand Secretaries meet regularly, and we try to support and assist each other in any way that we can. And currently we have some membership and marketing initiatives that are going to run across all of the orders. Where do we fit into this narrative we call the Masonic narrative? Well, Mark Masonry fits in after the second degree. And if you have done 3 degrees of Freemasonry, the first degree ceremony is reasonably long. The second degree ceremony is quite short in comparison, and the third degree ceremony is a much more complicated ceremony again. So standing out from it looking in, you'd expect that there's something missing from the second degree. The first degree alludes to early life, the second degree to our mid-working and learning life, and the third degree to late life. And yet the second degree, which represents the longest portion of our life, is the shortest ceremony. The indication there is there's more to this story. And the mark degree actually picks up there and talks about the working life of Masons. It characterises work and learning, and it really looks at and helps you explore working and learning life. It extends the moral teachings of the working tools that you will understand from the craft degrees, and it introduces the concept of arch masonry and explores the importance of the keystone in the arch, in arch masonry. So it's a bridge really in a way between the craft and the chapter. Although you don't have to go in that order, you can go directly from the craft to the chapter should you wish. Now, what else is there about it? It explains the parts of the third degree tracing board which the craft does not explain. If you have looked at a third degree tracing board, or you've been involved in a lecture on the third degree tracing board in a craft lodge, there are symbols on that tracing board that are never mentioned in craft lodges. You have those little mysteries unfolded when you join the mark degree. You also are provided with a mark, a Mason's mark, which is in the form of the Masonic cipher. and that is then used by your signature whenever you enter a Mark Lodge. The installation of a Master in the Mark degree explains further the progression of the craft narrative beyond the incidents that happen in the third degree ceremony. And those of you who are Master Masons will know full well that there are serious ceremonies, serious parts of the third degree ceremony, and the Mark degree picks up on what happens there and leads the narrative on further. But you have to aspire to being a Master in a Mark Lodge to find out that little bit of the story. So, what are the qualifications to be a Mark Master Mason? Well, it's quite simple. You have to be an affiliated and financial Master Mason in a craft lodge. That's the only qualification that's required of you. What sort of commitments are there? Well, Mark Lodges generally meet 6 times a year. There's often a rehearsal or a board meeting as well. And mostly in the evening, although there are a couple of daylight lodges. The ritual is similar to the craft ritual, but where in the craft you have 3 ceremonies to learn, in the Mark, thankfully, there is only 1. Makes it a little bit easier, particularly if you're a busy craft mason as well. The regalia is very similar to the craft regalia, except that it has maroon and light blue edging on it, and we wear a pocket jewel of the same coloured ribbon with a keystone attached to it. The big question, I suppose, is why would I bother to become a Mark Master Mason? Well, why wouldn't you? The Deputy Grand Master's not a bad sort of a bloke. The Grand Master tells me he's a pretty good sort of a bloke too, but we're a very friendly group of people. We have, I suppose, a different ethos to the craft in some ways. We're not as precise in our ceremonial. We like to, I suppose, have polish in our ceremonial rather than precision. And there's a bit of a difference there. You'll find also that in a in an installation in a Mark Lodge, that the team and the ceremonial is of a different feel. That's not to say that the craft ceremonial is worse or better in any way. I think our craft ceremonial is probably the best in the world, particularly when an active grand team does it. We just do it differently. The Mark Masonry further extends the Hiramic legend. The layout of the lodge is very similar to a craft lodge, so you'd feel quite comfortable walking into a Mark Lodge. There are a few extra officers sitting around, and some of our normal officers have extra responsibilities, but we have 2 wardens and a master and a chaplain and an immediate past master and deacons and an organist and a secretary and so on, and a few extras thrown in just to make life a bit more interesting. You'll also find that if you go along to a Mark Lodge that, surprise, surprise, many of the members will be people you know very well. If you look around a craft lodge, you may even see some of them wearing the Mark jewel in their pocket at craft meetings. Somebody will ask me, if I don't tell you now, what the fees are like. Well, because Mark Lodges meet only half as many times as a craft lodge, the fees are going to be half or less those of a craft lodge. What else can I tell you? Well, I can't tell you a lot more. You might have to join us to find out the rest. But in a few weeks' time, there's a new website going to be launched, which is actually called Beyond the Craft. And it will have the Mark Mariners and chapter all contained in that website, and links to all of the other orders that want to participate in it. So watch out for that. Thank you, Kane.
Thank you very much, Brother Bill. That's yeah, very detailed yet succinct sort of rundown of the Mark. So I must admit, I haven't really ever thought much about it, but I was quite taken by the idea of everyone getting their own actual mark that's in Masonic cipher. That's pretty intriguing. Also, so thank you again for that. And I'm really looking forward to hearing you go through the Royal Ark Mariners too in a little bit later tonight. And I should let everyone know, Brother Bill was kind enough to put together some sort of notes or a document to share. So I'll, if I work out how to do it, I'll share that in the chat with everyone. So I'll share that document for you all. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to pass over to the indomitable, I think, Right Worshipful Brother Barry. I think maybe I got that wrong. I should have just gone brother. But look, either way, very snazzy in the bow tie. So yeah.
Thank you, Kane. What a privilege to talk to the future of Freemasonry. And as Bill said, if it wasn't for you guys, we'd all be out there by ourselves and wondering what's happening soon. Yeah, I happen to be in another role. I'm in the craft. I'm Grand Almoner, and that keeps me fairly busy, as probably most of you possibly have heard of me in that role. But however, like Bill, I explored let's say the other degrees in Freemasonry at a moderately early age. In some sense, I waited, I joined Freemasonry at the age of 31, which was a little later than possibly some, but earlier than others. My father said to me when I was 18, was I interested? I, at that time, was in the military, and I had a tour of South Vietnam ahead of me, and I politely declined. Sometimes I regret it, but however, as it is, I joined when I was 31 and made up for lost time, as they say. But I also didn't join the mark or the chapter until I was a past master in the blue. It's not obligatory, but I recommend you not dismiss that. You should consider, if you've got time and the questioning or the inclination, you might consider joining the mark and the chapter, either or both, before you get to be the chair of the blue, because it certainly helps the knowledge of what the structure of Freemasonry is about. Now, Bill's already alluded to the first degree of Freemasonry is about learning a trust and a new way of life. And the second degree of Freemasonry talks about getting on with your life, building a career, building a family. And the third degree of Freemasonry talks about the inevitable end of life. And would you like to be at that point without having achieved what you want to achieve? So I assume that, I won't assume anything. Let's just say that in the third degree of Freemasonry, we are left wondering what the genuine secrets of a Master Mason are. The chapter attempts in a good way to recover those long lost secrets. As you can see behind me, there's a rather splendiferous layout of a Masonic lodge room in the chapter degree. I'll just put my chair back where it belongs. I'll now put up a short PowerPoint which I will discuss so I can share the screen. Is that the case? Yep, I can do that. I'll go to my desktop, I'll share, and I will open up a PowerPoint which I have prepared for this matter. And I will go click, and where does it say? It should say going to a slideshow. There we go. Whoa, look at that. A walk through the Holy Royal Arts chapter. Well, yes, the opportunity to walk through a chapter is pretty important. And as Bill already said, the Freemasonry in this state consists of the craft, the mark, and the chapter. And what that really means is that in Victoria, you join the craft, you do your 3 degrees, and immediately you're open to join mark and or chapter. If you join a Scottish lodge in Scotland, you're literally compelled to join the mark degree. And if you join a English lodge in England and Wales, you're literally compelled to join a chapter. And in fact, I'm a member of Naval and Military Mark, Craft, Chapter, Arc, and we've formed a family of 5 degrees. So effectively, if you agree to join the craft in the Mark Naval Military chapter, you will in fact go on without question to the Mark and then to the chapter. The story of is behind this chapter. It commences with the destruction of King Solomon's temple, 470 years after the Jews were taken into captivity in Babylon. So it's very historically, dare I say it, provable. Yeah, I could draw a long bow and say, yeah, if you want to believe it, it's provable. But it's nice. It's allegorically nice. It gives a solid background as to the journey that you're going to take as a companion in a chapter. So we invite the sojourners to come up, as you can see by my slide, the sojourners to come up to assist in preparing the building for the second temple, which occurred 470 years after the destruction of the first temple. And during the preparation of the building, the candidate discovers the genuine lost secrets of a master mason. I won't go into the detail because it's there for you to explore and there for you to experience, but it's quite a beautiful ceremony. In our chapter, we have not one, but we have three people sitting in the east who are considered our leaders or our principals. Now, the gentleman in the centre of this particular photograph is a brother called Ross Knight, and there he is sitting in his red robes, looks a bit like Santa Claus on a cold night, and he's holding a sceptre, and the sceptre is surmounted by a crown. And on his on his right is a gentleman called Haggai, who is the sort of second principal or the deputy master, and his sceptre has the all-seeing eye. And the gentleman on Ross's left is called Jeshua, the son of Josedek, who is the high priest, and he's carrying a sceptre with a bishoprical mitre. And these are the three principals, a bit like the master and the two wardens, but they all sit in the east in the chapter. There are other people in the lodge, a bit like Bill was saying. You come into a mark and you see additional people. Well, we have what they call three sojourners who sit in the west. There's the principal sojourner and the first and second assistant sojourner, and they assist the candidate to discover the genuine long-lost secrets. There are guardians. I've neglected to mention that this is a double ceremony degree. Effectively means that you don't get to become a companion in one degree. You takes two ceremonies, generally consecutive meetings, but not always. And in fact, you can actually be farmed out to another chapter to receive your second degree or the second part of the ceremony. And in the first part, you have to prove yourself worthy to actually go up to assist in rebuilding the Holy Temple. And the story there is quite beautiful. You have to pass through a number of veils, and each of those veils, you are challenged to ask for a password and a sign that can satisfy the guardian of the veil. And if you don't know it, he's got a sword, so you've got to be careful you have to be properly prompted and properly led through the ceremony. The next part of the talk I'm going to give is about our regalia. Yes, it's very colourful, and it consists of an apron with tassellated, where the marked degree doesn't have the tassels, and the seven of these little dingle dangles hanging off it. The chapter does, and it also has a jewel. You can see the six-pointed star, and it also has a sash. And this particular regalia is, because it has a white background in the triangle and a white background in the jewel, is that of a companion. And once you reach the chair of even third principal, that white changes to a crimson red. The layout of the chapter, and you quickly saw behind me perhaps one of the most beautiful degrees I've ever joined, and probably like some of you or like Bill, I'm either been through the chair or I'm part of the degree of something like 16 different degrees in Freemasonry, and there are only about 19 different orders, I should say. I think I've covered most of them. But you can see the squared pavement there, and on the squared pavement in the middle of the room is a double cube, and on the double cube is some symbols, and they relate to the section of the ceremony where the candidate discovers the long-lost secrets. More importantly, there are 12 banners up and down, 6 on each side of the squared pavement. And those 12 banners represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And if you do your historical research, you'll realize there are 3 superior tribes and 9 inferior tribes. And if you're a past master and you're listening to this talk, in the install board of a master's installation, you'll find that there are 9 past masters participating in the ceremony, and they represent the 9 inferior tribes of Israel, and the 3 who are seated in the east during the install board represent the 3 superior tribes of Israel. And that little anecdote was given to me by Most Worshipful Brother John Connell, and he used to tell the install board all about that. So there is a place for craft masonry in the chapter as well. And you'll see that there are 5 banners at the back. There's a white banner, meaning that this is the supreme order. And on the left, there's a bull, then there's a man, then there's a lion, and then there's an eagle. And when we set up the chapter, I remember cowboy, Brisbane Lions, and West Coast Eagles. So if you read left to right, you get the cow, the man, the lion, and the eagle. And it's pretty simple if you remember it. You use aid to prompts. On the floor of the chapter, there are 6 candles, 3 tall and 3 short. And they are laid out like and I won't use the term incorrectly, but the Star of David, or the 2 triangles inverted. So effectively, those 6 candles rather, are there to represent. It's a very complicated story. It's a bit hard to tell in 30 seconds, but realistically, those candles are interlacing, and it's an ancient arrangement as a symbol of considerable significance in the story, and that's also explained to you in one of the lectures. You'll also see the working tools at the foot of the tracing board there, or the layout, the axe, the shovel, and the pick. The pick, the shovel, and the crowbar, and they are used in the ceremony to help the candidate search amongst the ruins for the genuine long-lost secrets. So the next item I want to take on board is somewhat of the history. Now, the Act of Union between the 2 Grand Lodges in 1813 declared and ancient Masonry declared that there were 3 degrees of Freemasonry. Those are the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master mason, which included the supreme degree of a Royal Arch. Now, effectively, prior to that, there were 3 degrees, and the brethren were not content with that. And it was in 1813 that the chapter became a separate degree as such. And as I said earlier, if you join Freemasonry in England, when you sign the dotted line, you agree to take part in a chapter which is attached, in effect, to that lodge. For example, Naval and Military Craft in Melbourne is number 49, and our chapter is also number 49. So you effectively get a warrant which has the same number on it. Now, little was known about this degree until its rising in the 1740s and 1750s, and the earliest references start in the late 1600s. It's worked as a Royal Arch in Scotland, Ireland, and in the 1750s in America. Then in 1337, the Grand Lodge of France stated was an example of the Israelites when they erected the Second Temple. Earlier history showed that the moderns were not keen on the Royal Arch, but some were keen and worked the ancient ritual. It was a rather mixed bag. And as you possibly know, even today in England, there are multiple ceremonies or craft rituals used across England, even to this day. Whereas in Victoria, our craft ritual is fairly, common across every craft lodge. Some of the historical references in the ceremony refer that the degree may have come from Europe and that Royal Arch could have been a pre-1717 masonry. Royal Arch was the first of the very early ceremonies which was added to the craft degrees, and some believe the Royal Order of Scotland may be older than the Royal Arch. The rage continues. Grand Chapter, we have, as Bill said, like the Craft and Mark, we have a grand body, which is led by our first grand principal. And in the main, he rotates every 2 years, and he has a deputy first grand principal, and a second grand principal, and a third grand principal. That's the grand Haggai and the grand Jeshua. So effectively, it's like having a grand master, a deputy grand master, and 2 grand wardens. There you see at Jeff's shed, where Peter Gurr in the top left-hand corner, and Len Lacey, and I think that's Brian Davison, who are just being proclaimed, or maybe it's the opening of Grand Chapter, I can't remember. I think I was sitting up there as a member of ACOM. So effectively, our Grand Director there, Tony Del Nevo, is just calling upon everyone to give grand honours in the second or two. As I said before, there are 12 tribes of Israel, which are represented by the 12 flags on the floor. There's the double cube, and if you're clever enough, you can look at SRI, HRT, and HAB, and those are initials of Solomon, King of Israel, Hiram, King of Tyre, and Hiram Abif. So the craft is actually embedded in chapter. It's not exactly forgotten about, and it continues on throughout the story, and they work quite well together. And also, as Bill said before, we are harmonious, the 5 degrees of Freemasonry running together. In some parts of the world, they have actually, in South Australia, there is actually a craft, a mark, and a chapter working under the one warrant. So you join the craft and you can then move straight through and become a mark man and a companion in the same, what I would call it, same lodge. We like the craft, we like our precision, but we like our friendliness equally as well. And the bottom line is that if you're not having fun at lodge, doesn't matter what degree you're in, you've chosen the wrong lodge, or your expectations may in fact be unrealistic. So I would suggest to you that yes, both the mark and the chapter are realistically avenues for further exploring the future of your Masonic journey. And as you can see by me, I'm wearing a white, what you might call a waiter's jacket, but we like to think of it as a ritual. We also wear a red bow tie, and I have a sash that goes across my body, and an apron accordingly. So we get out of our dinner suits occasionally, and we get to wear our white jackets, and we have our jewels hanging on our pockets. And it's just nice to fraternalise. If you're a member of the mark and the chapter, or the chapter, you're actually allowed to wear your mark and chapter jewels in the craft, just to advertise to other members of your lodge that you've actually explored Freemasonry further. And if in fact you join all 3 degrees, you actually get a unity badge, which you get to pin on your lapel. Isn't that right, Bill? I can see him nodding. And if you're real lucky, you'll get someone like Bill or me to come along and pin it on you. And that being said, I'm happy to hand back the authority back to Kane.
Thank you very much, Barry. That was quite enlightening. And I've definitely got a few questions once we're all sort of wrapped up. But I would like to hand back over to Brother Bill, who's going to take us through Royal Ark Mariners.
Thank you, Kane. I'm just changing my view of the screen here a little bit. That's better. So, brethren, you've heard a very illustrious Royal Arch Mason talking to you about the Holy Royal Arch chapter. And he's completed the 5 degrees of Craft Masonry. The Grand Mark has this little appendant order that sits to the side of it, administered by our Grand Master. And that degree is called the Ancient and Honourable Fraternity of Royal Ark Mariners. What a peculiar arrangement to have an appendant degree attached to one of the 3 major Grand Lodges in this state. The Royal Ark Mariner degree was lost effectively in the problems that Freemasonry had in England, which Barry and I have both spoken about this evening. And it was a degree that had been running for many years based on the building of Noah's Ark. And I'll deal with that in a bit more detail later. But when Grand Craft and the chapter linked arms in Great Britain or in England, and the mark went off and did its own thing, the Royal Ark Mariner degree was all but lost. The Grand Master of the day, the Grand Master of the mark in England, went out and bought the rights to the degree for a reputed 30 guineas, which meant that he then owned the Royal Ark Mariner degree in Britain. And it became the province of the Grand Master, administered as a side order of the mark degree in England. In Victoria, when we pulled together the English, Irish, Scottish and Canadian Mark Lodges into the United Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of Victoria, it was agreed that the Grand Master would also take control of the Royal Ark Mariners in Victoria. So our Grand Master, most worshipful brother, whatever his name is, my boss, he is in fact the sole owner and proprietor of Royal Arch Masonry in Victoria. So Peter Julia as Grand Master is also the Grand Commander. And in the constitutions, the Ark Mariner degree is the sole province of the Grand Master of the day. That's something quite peculiar. He actually can, in fact, issue an edict to govern the Royal Ark Mariner degree without even consulting with his Royal Ark Council, his Board of General Purposes, if you like. I think you'd have to be a very brave Grand Master to do that, and Grand Masters who issue edicts of that sort of seriousness generally get a smack for it. Anyway, so we have this funny little order that sits to the side of the mark. In fact, it's not a funny little order at all. It is demonstrably older than the craft ceremonies as we know them. It's based in a passion play that relates to Noah, the Ark, the Rainbow and the Dove. It's really governed by the Grand Commander and his Royal Ark Council. Its narrative is one of ingenuity, of faith and of hope. So where does it fit in Victoria? Well, I've talked to you about that dispute in England and how we've come to own it. So therefore today it's the exclusive property of the Grand Master. The tradition continues here. We have Royal Ark Mariner lodges across Victoria and one in Hobart. And good evening again to the Tasmanians who are here. Some of our Ark Mariner lodges are twinned with Mark lodges, which means they meet on the same night, one after the other. Usually the Ark Mariner lodge first, followed by the Mark lodge. In other jurisdictions throughout the world, the degree is often worked as part of the Holy Royal Arch Constitution. So where does it fit in this Masonic narrative of ours? Well, the short answer is, in many respects, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with King Solomon's temple. It is, in fact, as I said, the narrative of the building of the Ark, of Noah, of the flood, of the rainbow and Noah's family. But it does have a number of aspects that are very similar to what we see in the modern day craft ritual. The lodge is set out not as a square, but as a triangle. The principal officers sit on the corners of the triangle and they roughly equate to a master and his two wardens. In this case, they are Noah, Japheth and Shem, his two of his sons. And there's virtually not a rectangle or a square to be seen. The floor mat in an Ark Mariner lodge is green, so the colour is different, and all of the symbolism is to do with triangles. So we've had a complete change of gear from squares and cubes and rectangles and keystones, and suddenly we're now dealing with triangles. And there is rich symbolism in Freemasonry relating to triangles, and it's explored in a whole range of other orders other than the Arc Mariners as well. Now, what are your qualifications for being a member of the Royal Arc Mariner degree? Well, it's fairly simple. You have to be a financial member of the craft, and you have to be a financial member of the Mark degree to become a Royal Arc Mariner. The commitments are roughly the same as a Mark Lodge or a chapter, 5 or 6 meetings a year, some rehearsals sometimes, some education sessions. And as I've said earlier, some of these lodges are twinned with Mark lodges, particularly in the country. So we set up an Arc Mariner Lodge, we have that degree, we close it, we change over all of the furniture, we change our regalia, we put on our Mark regalia, and then we have a Mark meeting all in one evening. But we tend not to have a candidate in both orders on the same night, or we'd still be there the next morning. The Arc Mariner degree is a much shorter ceremony. It's not as complicated. The language is very different. The linguistic structures that we see in Craft Masonry, Mark and Chapter have a theme running through them. You can hear the same language through the 3 of those. The Arc Mariners is expressed differently. Now, whether that makes it harder or easier to learn is basically left to the individual, I suppose, but the ceremony is shorter, it's less complex in many respects than the craft or particularly the chapter. Now, the regalia is a little bit different. It's an apron, a white apron with a rainbow ribbon edge on it. The flap is not a triangular flap, so the Mark and the chapter and craft aprons have the triangular flap. Interestingly, for a degree that is based so heavily on triangles, the flap is a semicircular flap, and in part it alludes to the shape of the rainbow. We wear a sash, a very pretty rainbow coloured sash, and we wear a pocket jewel, which is rainbow ribbon with a rainbow and a dove hanging off the bottom of it. Why would you join this degree? Well, it is different. It's a change of gear completely from the others. You might join it because you're curious, and that's good enough reason in itself. You might want a completely different and colourful Masonic experience that is outside of the narrative of King Solomon's Temple. You might want to be in a lodge with a group of usually very experienced and senior Freemasons who are very knowledgeable not only in the Arc Mariners but in Craft, Mark and Chapter usually as well. You might want just a different narrative to present the teachings of Freemasonry. And you might want to make a further advancement in your Masonic knowledge and just have another Masonic adventure. All of those are really good reasons to join the Royal Arc Mariner degree. Now, how might you join that? Well, you won't see people wearing an Arc Mariner pocket jewel in a craft lodge, because the Arc Mariner degree is not one of the 5 degrees recognised in the Constitution, because it's not one of the hieramic degrees. But if you ask a senior Mark Mason, they'll point you in the right direction, or they'll take you in their care and give you a set of papers. And failing that, you can email me or give me a call and I'll very smartly sort you out. You can look for the bright coloured regalia. You'll see it from time to time. You'll certainly see commanders in their bright regalia and their robes at Mark installations. And again, you could go to the new Beyond the Craft website, which is due out. Let me make a couple of final comments about the Royal Arc Mariner degree. The Royal Arc Mariner degree has its own separate enthronement team, and an enthronement is an installation. And that team is made up of senior Grand Mark officers who are also Arc Mariners. You keep your grand rank, if that's important to you, when you go into a Royal Arc Mariner Lodge. So a past junior Grand Warden will still have his right worshipful rank when he is a Royal Ark Mariner, if that's what motivates him. The Grand Master of the Mark degree is the Grand Commander. I'm the Deputy Grand Master of the Mark degree, which also makes me the Deputy Grand Commander of the Royal Ark Mariners. That means that, unlike the craft where they learn one grand installation ceremony, we have to learn two, and that keeps us on our toes. And sometimes we do two different ones on the same day. As I said, this degree is the exclusive province of the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of Victoria. Any of the other constitutions throughout the world that are Grand Mark constitutions have the same arrangement for their Royal Ark Mariners. Thank you, brethren.
And thank you again, Bill. That's yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff. I knew next to nothing about Royal Ark Mariners, so yeah, I'll definitely be jumping on Wikipedia, I can tell you that after this. Now, finally, I would like to invite Brother Rico Torres forward to take us through some of the exciting stuff that's been happening with Demolay Australia recently. So thank you, Brother Rico.
Thanks, Brother Kane. Good evening, brethren. My name is Rico. I'm a Master Mason member of the Maritime Lodge. I joined up Demolay when I was 14, and I was a member since then, and I actually joined up Freemason because of the pact that I actually made with my fellow Demolays, or my batchmate, when we first joined up, because we've learned a lot of Freemason during my Demolay days, and that we made a pact with each other that if one of us actually enters Freemason, all of us would actually enter. And then roughly about 10 years ago, when one of them actually petitioned a lodge, we all did submit our petition in different lodges between Philippines and Australia. So I'll just do a quick presentation. Let me just find which one is which. And please let me know if you guys can see the screen.
Yeah, we can see that, Rico. Yep.
Thank you very much. Okay. So the Order of Demolay. So what is Demolay? So Demolay is basically a premier international youth organization. Basically, what we do is we actually try and shape young men to become better leaders of tomorrow. But in layman terms, basically what it does is Demolay is a fraternity for young men between the age of 12 to 21. As I mentioned, it is an international organization with chapters all over the world. And Demolay chapters, like Freemason, actually conducts a business. We actually have two types of meetings. So we have the business meeting, and we also have the standard meeting, which is the regular meeting where we actually perform some ritual works. And basically what we do is, on top of actually having fun, because our members are basically at a young stage, we also teach them crucial skills about the world and the teachings about Freemasons, as well as how to actually make a better leader in the future. So we started back in March 1919. And we actually have been going since then, and roughly about more than 3 million members since then. And just to give you some examples on what we actually try to teach our young members. So we actually have 7 cardinal virtues, which is situated there on the left. So one of them is respect. Respect is basically called filial love as well, where we must respect and love our parents. We have reverence, which is believe in respect to our God or supreme being. We have courtesy, which is we need to be courteous to all and everyone that we meet. Comradeship, which is true friendship and loyalty. Fidelity, which is our duty to be trustworthy in all things. Cleanness, because we believe that essentially to exercise cleanness personally and in what we say and what we do. And then citizenship, which is also called patriotism. As a citizen of Australia, it is our duty to honor our country, its flag, and obviously the public institution. Now, on top of the 7 cardinal virtues, we also adhere to our Demolay codes of ethics, which is listed there. I think one of my favorites down there is number 7, which is the Demolay's word is as good as its bond. It's always been the go-to code of ethics when we were young. Every deals that we make or every promise that we make, if we actually says that Demolay's word, then we basically force our brother not to lie, and it's a solid promise. So if he says, "Are you going to show up or you're going to attend Sunday?" and then we're going to ask yes, and then when the brother says Demolay's word, then if they said yes, then they would definitely be there on a Sunday. So how did we start? So the Order of Demolay, as I said, was founded back in 1919 in Kansas, Missouri. It was founded by Dad Frank Esland, which is at that time the director of the Masonic Relief and Employment Bureau from the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Now, how it started basically is near the end of World War I. Dad Land was actually working at the Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the Employment Bureau when he met a young man who actually lost his parents during the war. And they became good friends, and he realized that there are a lot of other kids were in the same situation. So he actually encouraged his young friend to actually start inviting his friends, and then they can actually gather up and hold a meeting in a Masonic lodge. And then they share stories, and they actually become closer friends with each other. And one time, Dad Land was actually telling a story about Jacques Demolay, and the group actually decided to name their group from Jacques Demolay, which is the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. And that from that time on, it became an official group, and then they started inviting more friends. And then Dad Land decided later on that because the group is actually getting bigger, they need to actually have some sort of structure. They need to have a philosophy and a principles. So they've actually created a ritual for the Demolay. So the ritual was actually written by Dad Frank Land and as well as another Mason. So what you would find in the Demolay rituals is closely related to what you would find in the Freemason rituals as well. So when you join, so what would actually be the induction like? So in the Demolay, we actually have 2 degrees. It consists of an initiatory degree and a Demolay degree. The initiatory degree basically focuses mostly on our 7 cardinal virtues. So we actually try to teach them the meaning of the 7 cardinal virtues, which is basically the precept of the order. Now, after you completed the initiatory degree, you then proceed to a Demolay degree, which is a dramatic portrayal of what actually happens to Jacques Demolay and his brothers during that time, mostly trying to actually teach them what comradeship is. It's like basically watching a play during the Middle Ages, and then we actually do demonstrate what they've actually gone through and then the value of camaraderie. Obviously, in Demolay, there is actually no hazing involved or no horseplay. And the ceremonies, basically, we try to actually make sure that it's solemn and serious. And we actually try to actually show the principles of the order during those degrees. Now, this picture actually shows the founding members of our chapter. Our chapter is named the Jacques Demolay Victoria chapter. And as you see, this is the regalia that they actually wear. The active members actually wear a black robe with the slight difference. So the one wearing purple is basically our chaplain, and the one wearing red, oh sorry, it's actually the one wearing red is actually our chaplain, and the one wearing purple is actually our marshal, which is equivalent to the master of ceremonies. or it could be the other way around. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember properly. And the structure of the officers is similar to what we actually have in the Blue Lodge. So we actually have 3 lights, or the 3 counselors. So we have the master counselor, the junior counselor, the senior counselor, and the junior counselor, and then the rest are actually different officers like the stewards. We also have the deacons, and then we also have the scribe, the treasurer, and so on. Now, obviously, it's a youth group, so there are different activities that we actually do in the Demolay. Within certain parameters, of course, we try to encourage the guys to actually create their own calendar for the entire year. So a chapter is basically run and managed by the active members themselves. And us as a Freemason and Guardians, we're more like just a guide to them and actually gives them some suggestions on how to actually do things, but mostly they are the one that actually runs their own chapter. So that they can actually plan social functions, they can run fundraising to actually collect money for their chapter. Obviously, because young kids, they would actually set up some athletic activities among themselves. Also, the only restriction basically is anything dangerous, because everyone is covered by insurance, and we wanted to make sure nothing gets hurt while they're actually within the chapter, or if they're actually gathering from one of their activities. So I think a lot of people have asked me this before. Is Demolay actually a junior Mason? So I think the simple answer is actually no. Demolay is actually a separate entity from Freemason. Although the relationship basically is, it was founded by a Freemason. A lot of things was actually created by Freemasons, but it is actually a completely separate entity. The closest relationship currently it has is that majority of the chapters around the world is actually sponsored by a Freemason or any Masonic group. And we do actually most of the time meet in Masonic lodges. The chapter, as we call it, not to be confused with the other chapter, is basically where is basically looked after by what we call the Chapter Advisory Council, which is predominantly Master Masons or parents of the active members. Now, how does Freemason normally get involved with Demolay? So each Demolay chapter, as I mentioned before, is mostly sponsored by a group of Freemason or Masonic lodge. They can either be a Scottish Rite, York Rite, and a Shrine as well. And the responsibilities of the sponsoring body is make sure to actually provide a chapter or to provide the chapter a place to meet, provide an adult supervision, and to assist the chapter whenever there is an adult supervision needed. So the chapter is mostly run by their officers, so the active members, and then we are actually just there as an advisor to actually make sure that everything is followed within the rules. Most of the advisors are a member of Freemasons, Senior Demolays, Guardians, and there's actually, so from the advisory council, we always appoint one main person to actually liaise with the active members, and they are mostly called the chapter dad, which is the designated member of the advisory council that would mostly liaise with the active member. So what do an advisor actually do? So ultimately, we just basically make sure that they follow the policies and procedures that's set by the Demolay Australia. So the Order of Demolay actually is governed by the Supreme Council Order of Demolay Australia, which is a separate entity from Freemason, and that's where we basically report all our activities to, and our monthly everything basically that a chapter does, gets reported to the Supreme Council. It's like the Grand Lodge basically. So to become an advisor, we actually go through a very strenuous vetting process. So everyone that becomes an advisor would actually have to complete a formal written application. They would need to provide a 100 points identification. It involves criminal history check, a current working with children, completion of an online training, and a completion of a face-to-face training as well, provided by accredited trainers. So if you wanted to join, the only requirement basically is that obviously you have to be boys between age of 12 and 21. You need to be of good character and reputation. You need to believe in a supreme being, and then all you have to do after that is send in your petition to a Demolay chapter. And that's it from me. It's a very quick one.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Rico. That was absolutely fascinating. And also, yeah, I'd like to extend my thanks to all of the speakers tonight. I've actually had a couple of private messages sent to me saying, you know, that they've people have found tonight really quite enlightening, and it sort of doesn't matter how long you've been in Freemasonry for, there's always something new to learn. So that's always quite encouraging to hear. So again, thank you everyone for your absolutely fascinating presentations. What I would like to do now is sort of throw it open to all of you for any questions. I'm sure from the speakers we've heard tonight, I'm sure you've got some burning questions you want to ask. So now's the time. I suppose, you know, we can, you know, we're all sort of civil gentlemen here. I'm sure we can just sort of jump in and maybe just let the speaker know who you're addressing.
And mate, I'm keen to ask straight off the bat. We've got a couple of youngsters on the line, Earl and Steve. Maybe are those young chaps in the Demolay?
Yes,
they are,
President.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from them. Have they got something to say about their chapter? They're more interested in showing us their phone at the moment. G'day, Earl and Stephen.
President Bill, Robert Billing, President.
Yes.
Can I just mention to the brethren that acknowledge the presence of 3 Demolays at the moment. The Tiamo brothers, Johnny from Brazil, and my son Renato Miguel. Thanks for joining us tonight.
It's fantastic to see such great support and such high-ranking support from Demolay. They seem like an absolutely fantastic organisation that, to my understanding, are really only just kicking off in Victoria this year, and the Blue Lounge is more than happy to support this this initiative. It sounds like a wonderful thing for these young boys and for Freemasonry.
Thank you.
Robert, if I could just jump in as head in Australia, I'd like to thank the Blue Lounge for allowing us to make our presentation. But my reason for my interjection is to ask Johnny from Brazil, who I met in Brisbane last year, and he is a master, just past master counsel, I believe. He's just gone out of the chair in his chapter in Brazil, and very experienced and very articulate young man. So I just ask him to speak to everybody and give them what Demolay means to him. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you, Trevor Green. Well, I believe that Demolay is, as people said before, the best school of leadership we can find. The experience of being a master counselor, I believe that totally changed you. I mean, you have to learn how to talk to people and, how can I say, manage your chapter. So that is totally a change. And I believe for the future, we'll need young people who have this experience with leadership, and Demolay can bring that to, well, a lot of people. We're talking about millions in our world, in our history since 1919. So I believe it's totally different from what we are used to. So we are used to see young people as someone who has no experience, so someone who doesn't have the abilities to lead, and Demolay changed that. So I believe it's a change, and I believe it's really good for our countries and for the world, and that starts with Demolay. So just to mention some people, we have, for example, Walt Disney. Walt Disney was from Demolay. Bill Clinton was from Demolay as well. So we have important leaders in our world, and not only in politics, but everywhere, who learned their cardinal virtues from Demolay. And I think that's really important. So that's how I see it, as a school of leadership. And as a past master counselor and as a regional master counselor now, I believe this experience can really change you and change you to something better, making you learn, making you have this experience. So I really believe in the importance of Demolay order. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. If that's not a good advertising for Demolay, I don't know what is. Thank you very much again.
Trevor, if people are interested in getting their kids along, their sons along to Demolay, what is the process? You've muted yourself, brother.
In Victoria, I suggest you contact Archie or Rico. Once COVID lifts, they'll be much more active. Obviously, they're not meeting only via Zoom like the rest of the world is. But I suggest you contact them directly. You can go through our website. We have a website. You can contact us on that. We can direct all calls in regards to Demolay from there. We only exist in New South Wales and Victoria at the moment. Our expansion process has been shut down because of COVID, but it does take a fair amount of work to start a chapter. But we really encourage any Freemasons with sons who would like to see a Demolay chapter start in their area, anywhere, wherever it is. Freemasons can start them with our assistance, but through our website is probably the easiest way. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Trevor. I saw a comment from someone representing Job's daughters. I assume someone knows what that is. Is that for the young ladies?
Yes, it is.
What else can you tell us about that, Amy? We don't have any ladies on the line, mind you.
Amy, before you answer, I'm President Bill, Robert Billing. I just would like to introduce you.
Mate, just rumble, do.
She's the daughter of the past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the Philippines, most worshipful Rentoy.
Oh, fantastic.
So I've been a Job's daughter in the Philippines since I was 12 years old. That was in 2004. And we're just the female counterparts of Demolays. We're mainly relatives of Masons. So yeah, because my dad is a Mason, he just brought me to the Grand Lodge, and then that's where I started becoming a Job's daughter. So here in Australia, I think the Job's daughters are only in Queensland. So we're limited. We have a limited presence here in Australia, but we have members in America, Canada, Brazil, Philippines, and Australia.
Well, welcome. I hope you enjoyed the presentations tonight.
I did. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question for Bill, the Deputy Grand Master of the Mark. Bill, Kane touched on the cipher and the mark that you get given when you become a mark man. Now, I'm led to believe that mark is recorded in sort of grand areas. How far back do these marks go? Hundreds of years?
Robert, they go back to prior to 1100 AD. If you look at the operative masons in the cathedrals and great buildings of Europe, we see them right up until virtually current day in buildings, even buildings that maybe were built less than 30 years ago in Melbourne. If you go to some parts of the buildings, you'll find the masons' marks in those buildings. If a stone's been cut, for instance, for a windowsill or something like that, often you'll find somewhere on the stone that Mason's mark. Now, he may not be a Freemason, but he will have some sort of mark or a signature of his own. From the point of view of the Masonic cipher, there are cipher-like markings that go back to the 1300s that we're aware of. Generally, a lot of those markings, because they were made with a chisel, are made of arrangements of straight lines and angles. So you could look at them and say, oh yes, this fellow must have been a marked Mason and got his mark. Well, not necessarily. It may just have been the signature he made with a chisel. But marks were allocated to people back in the 1500s. And there are registers of those in existence. And we know from writings that there are, or should be, registers that go back to the 1100s, but nobody has one, or nobody's found one in existence. So it's a very ancient practice. And as a matter of interest, every year the operative Masons and the mark Masons give a scholarship to the leading stonemason who does his training in Victoria. And when we do that, we present him with his mark and a heavy setting maul. And he's entitled to use that mark with his work anywhere he goes. And should he join a mark lodge down the track, that mark is already reserved for him and nobody else can have it.
Well, it's a very cool tradition.
It's a great tradition.
Thank you, Bill. We have a question for Rico about the Demolay. When the young lads turn 21 or 22, whatever the case may be, do they get kicked out? How does it work, Rico? Yeah, I can see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you. Maybe one of the other Demolay brothers.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that they actually become senior Demolays. So the only difference is that they can still attend, but they can no longer participate in active activities. So they can't actually be officers anymore or actually be in active ceremonies within the chapter. They're more like a support group, and then along with other senior Demolay, then they can actually form their own sort of alumni club or alumni chapter, which is mostly consists of Demolay that are actually 21 and over.
Okay. And
I
suppose,
just sorry to interject, just sort of on that similar question, I would direct this at, is it Amy, I think, the Job's daughter's sort of representative. Similar question. What about a Job's daughter when she reaches sort of the age where she sort of ages out? Obviously with Demolay, the young men have the option of joining sort of regular Freemasonry. What about the girls? What's on option? What's an option for them?
Great question. So Job's Daughters members are usually from 10 to 20 years old. And then when you're 18, you can join Eastern Star or Order of the Amaranth, which are also appendant bodies of the Freemasonry. I'm also a member of the Order of the Amaranth. But in the Amaranth and the Eastern Star, the Freemasons are also a part of the order. They also participate in the activities of the chapter or the court. Because in Eastern Star, you call a lodge chapter, and then in the Order of the Amaranth, you call it a court. And in Job's Daughters, we call them a Bethel. So those are the options for the women, your wives or your siblings or your aunts, whoever. Your relatives can join Job's Daughters, Eastern Star, or the Order of the Amaranth.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking me through that. Do people know the Order of the Eastern Star, is that sort of in every jurisdiction across Australia, or is it sort of like Demolay, Job's sort of in select places?
I'm not affiliated with them, so I'm not really sure. But I searched for the Order of the Amaranth here in Victoria, and I've seen probably 5 courts that are active, but I'm not sure with other jurisdictions.
There's certainly both
Kane,
heavily
I think
involved in
the Order of
Queensland.
the Eastern Star is right across Australia. I've got a couple of friends that are in the Order of the Eastern Star, and I think they are across Australia at the moment.
It's definitely in Victoria, and there's a number around it. I know their numbers are struggling a bit at the moment, like most organisations, but it's definitely here in Victoria.
I got a question for Eminent Brother Barry. Barry, mate, the chapter seems to be complicated. It's got so many bits, and I've heard the ritual is very long. Is it difficult?
There are two major proponents in the ritual. It's the first principle and the principle sojourner. It's a catechism. It's almost like a question and answer. And they perform probably 90% of the ceremony. So the principal sojourner brings the candidate in and instructs him how to proceed, and he's challenged at various points by the first principal or the master. And yes, it's quite lengthy. There's no doubt that there's no escaping the fact that Freemasonry develops the mind. You know, you'll find if you sit in the craft lodge, the people who know the ritual best are those who've all got their seniors cards, because they've put in the hard yards and the hard years, and they actually, you know, they're benefiting from that effort. There's a lot of argument or discussion about whether we should be reading ritual, whether we should be putting it up on a screen so everyone can read it. And a lot of, may I say, there are some people who would suggest that that's a better way that might encourage more people to join. I don't necessarily agree with that. In my middle years, I was district coordinator for the Central District, and dare I say it, at the risk of being crucified, I would say to a lodge member or a lodge, if the brother doesn't know it, and that's his duty, then let him read it. Let him read it, but don't let him read it without having rehearsed it, because there's nothing worse than somebody reading scripture, ritual. They have no idea how to pronounce words, no idea how to pause at the right spots, and effectively it just crucifies, or pardon the loose analogy, it ruins the event. But it's better than having somebody stand up there stuttering and stammering and 8 or 10 people trying to prompt, and it's just making a dog's breakfast of something.
Right.
If it's the worst case scenario where somebody must do the work, then I would say it's not desirable, but it's the best outcome is let the person read it.
We could get into a whole argument about the whole reading thing, Barry.
There's another aspect to that too, though, I think, and that is that I wouldn't like to see inability to learn the ritual preclude someone from being an active member of their lodge.
Thank you, Bill. And that's probably the underlying factor. If somebody's put the time in to turn up and their ability of memory recall is less than what you would call average, then that shouldn't cease their progression. You should stand by that person and help him develop. And you'll find, and I can, not that I'm going to, but I could probably name a dozen people I know that started their Masonic journey reading, and by the time they got through the chair, they became excellent ritualists, because you encourage them, not condemn them, you encourage them. And that's what the Brotherhood is supposed to do, is to help people develop their skills. And whether they have it naturally, none of us are natural memory instant recallers. We all have to work hard at it.
Everyone apart from Jack, I think, Barry.
May I chip in there, Robert?
Yeah, go, Kev.
I'm a member of Chapter, Mark, Royal Ark, Knight Templars. I found Chapter to be the most colourful degree I went through. Yeah, and I struggle with learning ritual because I'm getting old, my brain's getting decrepit and it's slowing down. But I class the rituals, and I'm not putting it against any other degree or anything, but Chapter, Mark, and Knight Templars, and a bit of a side to Royal Ark, were some of the most interesting rituals I've actually passed through. And like I'm holding officers in most of those jobs. And, you know, I would have been the eminent preceptor in Knight Templars now if it had been for some virus they told me is kicking around the world. So that's got to wait until next year. But I would highly recommend them. But I would recommend you do Mark first before you do Chapter. Because I done Chapter, and until I done Mark, it didn't all fall into place. Just a little bit of advice from me. Other people might think I'm wrong, but that's fair enough. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Kev. Barry, I've got another question about the Chapter. Yeah, I don't want to upset anyone. Like it feels like it might be a Christian degree. Now you're going to tell me I'm wrong, but tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, it's based on the Old Testament for a start, and it's the story of the.
Oh, right.
It's as simple as that. It's based on the Old Testament. There's nothing at all about the Christianity or resurrection or any of the Gospels. It's purely Old Testament stories. So yeah, interestingly, we have the three principles: Zerubbabel, Haggai, and Jeshua. Well, if you read the book, the Bible, you'll find that they were something about 230 years apart. So they can never sit together in the same room. They didn't exist at the same time. But conveniently, we meld that together for the chapter for the purposes of telling a biblical historical story. And may I say that the Jewish brethren, and there are a lot of Jewish brethren who absolutely love the chapter because it tells about the story of building the Holy Temple. And of course, the Holy Temple is the Holy Temple for literally every religious belief. And effectively, that's what makes Jerusalem such an attractive place to visit and to pilgrimage to. So no, it's not Christian at all. It's not until you leave the chapter, the mark, and the craft behind, and the other 10 or 12 degrees, about 2/3 of them are genuinely Christian in their intent, and effectively they make no excuse. Kevin just mentioned about the Knight Templars. Well, that's the Knight of Christ. So effectively, it's a Christian degree without any sort of issue. And there is no question. Red Cross of Constantine, Knight Templar priests, Commemorative Order of Acon, about 4 or 5 of the degrees which are Christian, and and you must accept the fact that if you enter those degrees, that you do so as a devout Christian.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think Jack, you wanted to ask Bill a question.
Yes, I did. And just to sort of add to what was said earlier, congratulations to the club and all the speakers tonight. I thought it was a fantastic set of presentations, and I love the mark and the chapter, and Bill and Barry always give me happy thoughts when I talk to them. But I have to say, Demolay, very, very, very encouraging to see that, and I know that it's a very exciting initiative, and to see young men in today's society wanting to take responsibility for themselves and learn about virtue and honour is very encouraging. It's not something that comes to mind when you think of 11 and 12-year-olds these days, I have to say. But just a question to Bill. Bill, I mean, I've heard you speak on this before, and I thought there's something that might be worth covering, but you know, one of the big lessons in the ARC degree is the lessons of wisdom, strength, and beauty. And boy, where do we hear that? We hear that somewhere else as well. And the parallels between the Noachitic tradition and the Hiramic legend are quite interesting. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the historical competition that existed between the Noachites and, say, the Hiramic legend or the Solomonic tradition, because it's interesting, that story. I think it really contextualizes maybe where the ARC sits in terms of from a historical point of view.
Thanks, Jack. Well, that's a long story, and it's best left to be discussed another night. But let me put it this way and do it briefly to allow for some other questions. If you, as Freemasons, were referred to in newspapers in the late 18th and up until the mid-19th century in Britain, you may have been referred to as Brother So-and-so a Freemason. You may equally have been referred to as Brother So-and-so a Noahite. Both terms were used interchangeably to express that a person was a member of a Masonic order. And that points to this notion that we have the Noahite tradition and the tradition, the Hiramic tradition. And I don't know that that's ever going to be resolved, and neither should it be, because the Hiramic tradition has its place in the 5 degrees of craft masonry, of course, and the Noahite in the Royal Ark Mariners. Now, there was a great deal of dispute at the time of the Great Schism in England about where the Noahites should sit. These people who looked at and drew a great deal of wisdom from the story of Noah. But Freemasonry, as we know it, the Hiramic legends prevailed. And in fact, we went from having a large number of lodges working the Noahite ritual, which was much more expansive than we have now in our Ark Mariners. There are recorded to be at least 9 degrees, 9 ceremonies in the Royal Ark Mariners, and we work but one of them. There were a large number of lodges working those degrees, and when the schism was healed and everything settled down, virtually all of those were lost. We see the remnants of them in some of the other orders, and we've had some discussions in Mark Masonry in Victoria about reviving some of those degrees and actually running them as a demonstration to see just how interesting they are and how interested people would be in them. So I guess that's a watch this space, and I didn't really answer the question because I'm not going to be drawn into a very expansive discussion at this stage of the night. I'm sorry about that, Jack. It's a very interesting story to have, but it's a story that needs to be dealt with on its own.
Barry, it's James from Walhalla. How are you, Barry?
Good, good.
Just a bit of a left field question, if I may. My understanding is the chapter and the mark in some states in Australia are operated under the one lodge, in that you can do your 3 craft degrees and as a natural consequence do the mark and do the chapter. And I understand that that operates also in many constitutions throughout the United States. I also understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that in some of those states in Australia, membership basically covers all those 3 degrees. Is there any consideration or any thoughts that in Victoria we might consider that type of arrangement that works in other states? Is that at all under consideration?
Thank you for throwing me under the bus. When the Naval and Military family 4 years ago created 6 craft meetings a year, 3 chapter and 3 mark, we actually applied to Grand Mark and Grand Chapter for a combined warrant. We were politely told, not yet. It has occurred in South Australia, I'm told. There is actually a craft warrant that covers the mark and chapter degrees. Stepping to one side, Grand Chapter in New South Wales, when the first Grand Principal is installed as first Grand Principal of the chapter, is also installed as the Grand Master of the mark degree. So you have the one first Grand Master, Grand Principal. And I think that's about the extreme of it, isn't it, Bill? I don't know if there's any other merging in Australia.
Well, maybe I can just add a little bit to that for James. There are ongoing discussions about various models for lodges in Victoria. And I think you'll find that the attitude that prevails is that we would like to examine all possible options to ensure that we have representation of Freemasonry across this state and anywhere in Tasmania where we need to offer some assistance. And that the Tasmanian comment is to do with Mark and Mariners for us, obviously, because that's the extent of our constitutional capacity in Tasmania and only in Hobart. But if we just call it Victoria, we've had a number of discussions about models for a single lodge working craft, mark and chapter. We have a discussion going on at the moment about the resuscitation of a mark warrant for a lodge, a craft lodge that had a mark lodge attached to it. So there were two different lodges with different warrants, but part of the same family, like Naval and Military. And they're looking at resuscitating their mark lodge and maybe resuscitating their chapter and having a similar system to Naval and Military. I'm talking to a craft lodge in the country at the moment, which also has a mark lodge, but they have no chapter. And they're looking at forming an Arc Mariners to start with, to see whether they can have an Arc Mariners Lodge meeting as part of their family of lodges. And if they can get that to work, then they'll look seriously at a chapter as well. The issue of forming of a warrant being issued to a lodge to work 5 degrees is a vexed one. Which constitution gives them the warrant? Grand Craft doesn't have any authority under its powers to issue a warrant for a mark lodge. The mark doesn't have the authority to issue one for the chapter or the craft. So there is an issue there. Now, all of these are constitutional issues, and we know what we can do with constitutional issues when we need to. And maybe at some stage we need to have that serious discussion. However, I've had a bit of experience with these constitutions where they have a large number of degrees worked in them. And I would have to say that many of the members believe that lip service alone is paid to some of the degrees. New South Wales is held up as an example of all of the degrees in a confederation, and a large number of their members would wish that they hadn't combined the mark and the chapter 30 years ago, because they believe that the integrity of the degrees has diminished over time. Now, I can't make a comment personally about that. I'm just saying what some of their own members say. So, you know, you could have a lodge where you are up in the leafy valleys and the ferny glades that meets and is a family of craft, mark and chapter. That could probably be very easily arranged with 3 warrants. And then you could arrange how you met. So you could have a craft meeting every second meeting and a mark or a chapter one in the in-betweens. You know, we need to start and look at these ways of doing things. We need to be progressive. Craft Masonry particularly, but also mark and chapter, has been hamstrung by its adherence to a constitutional document that was written 130 years ago. I know that's provocative, but, you know, our future's our future, and our future isn't in our past. So if you want to do something, if you want to do something, hang on, if you want to do something a bit revolutionary, talk to us. Sorry, Robert.
I totally agree, Bill. The family mark, chapter and craft would suit a regional town. We've got Mildura, Wangaratta, Horsham. There's no point in having 3 craft lodges and 1 mark, and then you go to the next town, there's 2 craft lodges and a chapter. You're better off just having 1 craft lodge in a rural town and a mark and a chapter. They don't have to meet under the same warrant or same banner. They just, as you've just said, 1 meeting, 1 meeting, 1 meeting, 1 meeting, rotation. But it would do the 3 degrees or the 5 degrees of masonry an enormous amount of good if we could get the harmony together in rural towns. Mildura, for example, which is suffering badly, as we know.
Bill and Barry, I think on a personal level, I think that idea is fantastic, and I have heard rumours about that type of thing, and I personally would be fully supportive of it being in a rural area. If then I sort of know that, oh well, it's a Wednesday every month, but I have to. Yeah. I know what night I'm meeting on, but I'm just not sure what order I'm going to. Just take all three sets of regalia. So you just miss out on that slight benefit of having a different lodge, because it's a different set of blokes, right? You know you're going to see this group of people there and that group of people there.
It eventually will become the same set of blokes. You might find that your junior warden in one lodge, and the other warden, your other lodge, your master, and another lodge, you're the chaplain. It's great exercise for the brain. It really focuses the brain, and any of you in more than one degree, you'll know what I'm saying. Even in the craft, when you got first, second, what are we doing tonight? Oh, we're doing a third degree. Oh, what am I doing? Oh, the prayers. Okay, fine. You switch on. You switch on for that duty, and that's you get the added advantage of exercising the brain box.
Now, if any brother is dying to ask a question, you type it in the chat if you don't want to shout it out, but please shout it out now. We've got a lot of...
Just a tip for you, Robert. With the 5 degrees, Barry, would that interrupt any degree work on the same night, or would you hold it on a different night? Just a silly question.
No, it's a good question, because if you had, for example, your summons would come out as one summons for the 3 degrees. Let's work a blank sheet of paper. And if you're doing this sort of marriage of the 3 degrees, you'd have one summons and you put it out to even the non-members of, say, you're a master, you're a fellow craft in a craft, and you're getting a summons that's talking about the chapter. You're getting a summons about talking about the mark as well. You say, oh, I'll look forward to that. So you're already instilling a future pathway for your fellow crafts and your master masons. And effectively, what you would do if you've got good planning, if you've got no ritual work in the craft, you say, right, on this particular night, a craft night, we're going to open and close at 7 o'clock till 7:30. Then we're going to do a marked degree. Oh, golly gosh, all of a sudden, you can have 2 degrees on the same night, or 2 different orders on the same night. You wouldn't put 2 ceremonies on the same night, but you could easily... You could easily put a business meeting followed by a ceremonial meeting.
Yeah. No, that sounds
Simon Usher.
It's really good.
Simon, you had a question next.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I'm interested in Brother Bill and Brother Barry's thoughts, as well as any other brother involved in the other orders. So I'm relatively young within Masonic terms, having been a Master Mason since mid-2018, and with a very demanding personal and professional life. And I'm talking to several brethren about trying to plan a path forward within Freemasonry and balancing taking office within Blue Lodge and looking at further orders beyond the craft in terms of Mark and Royal Arch and others. I think Brother Kevin made the comment that he would advocate joining Mark before others. I'd be interested in the perspectives of Brother Bill, Brother Barry, and anyone else who'd care to offer them in terms of balancing one's time, making a contribution to the lodge and orders that one's is part of. Other people's thoughts about how one might progress through. Is it important to join the Mark before the Arch? Should one wait to take the chair in Blue Craft before Blue Lodge, before joining any appendant orders, or any other thoughts in that space?
Maybe I'll start there, because my journey through Freemasonry was a bit different from many people's. I had actually joined the craft, joined the Mark, joined the chapter, joined the Mariners, the OSM and the KTs, the 18th and the 30th degree before I was 30. And I'd been through the chairs in most of those by the time I was 35. But the first chair I went into was the Mark chair. And in those days, you had to get a dispensation to go into the chair of Master in the Mark if you hadn't been a past Master of the craft. These days, thankfully, we don't have that hocus pocus. The reason I opted for the Mark well, there were probably two reasons. They desperately needed a master and I was prevailed upon, was one. But the other one was that my career and family life were moving along and I only had to learn one ceremony. I only had to be in the lodge as master 6 times in the year. So that allowed me some flexibility. I was still doing things in the craft and I was still doing things in the chapter and other places, but I was only learning one big body of work at a time. I could pull back on the other things when family life and professional life demanded me to do that. And it was relatively easy to handle. And it gave me a good grounding, I suppose, for learning 3 degrees in the craft when that point came, and certainly for learning the first principles work in the chapter. So, you know, I guess it's a little bit like a choose your own adventure. You take whatever story thread you want at the time, but there's sufficient flexibility now in the system to allow you to select whichever journey that or whatever rings your chimes at the time. From a practical point of view, the Mark chair is probably the easiest of the 3. And the Arc Mariners is a good one as well, but that assumes you're a member of the Mark and you're also a member of the Arc Mariners. Both of them are only one ceremony. The Mark ceremony is a very easy narrative to follow, and the Arc Mariners ceremony is a short ceremony. So if you limited time but want the experience of going through the chair, I'd say one of those 2 before you went to the craft or the chapter. Other traditionalists would say I'm wrong.
Just as an aside to Simon, Simon, when you joined the craft, you were informed the most important thing in Freemasonry is your family and your work commitments. And I'll push that until the day I die. Like, I'm lucky, my kids are off my hands. I didn't join Freemasonry until I was in my 50s. So my rugrats had grown up and left home, so there is actually a God. But family and work do come first. Freemasonry is the last thing on your list. So do not overtax yourself, my friend.
Yeah, totally correct, Kevin. Totally correct.
I'd like to make a comment, if I may, as I know Simon fairly well, and with respect to Bill, my choice after the Blue Lodge was the chapter, and my reason for that was fairly simple, is that I saw it as the completion of the 3rd degree, and that was why I went that way. Bill's tried many times to get me to join Mark, but I haven't quite got there yet. And at the time I joined chapter, my time was limited. I was working full time and travelling quite a lot for work. And I don't regret that decision at all. And Barry said earlier that it's a very colourful degree, and it's got a great story to it, which no doubt Mark has a great story as well. But for what it's worth, that was the reason I went that way.
Brethren, we are starting to get longer than we were hoping. Kane, did you have some final thoughts on this?
No, I was just about to jump in there and say, despite the fact I think we could go on all night, I think we have to sort of draw a line in the sand somewhere. So, I think we might have to wrap it up here. But, on behalf of the Blue Lounge Social Club, I would love to sort of sincerely thank the presenters tonight for, taking us through the different degrees and Demolay Australia. I think it's, I think I speak for everyone when I say that it was absolutely fascinating. I would also like to, just as a personal aside, thank some of the brothers from really across the world. We have, people calling in from Brazil, also Amy from Job's Daughters. I wasn't expecting such a sort of broad spectrum of people and orders and rites, and I found it absolutely fascinating. So again, thank you very much. Before I hand back to Rob to sort of close us up for the night, I would like to encourage you all to keep an eye out on Facebook for the next installment of Blue Lounge Social Club's sort of beyond the Craft Lodge series. Nothing's been set in stone yet, but yeah, we have every intention of making this a bit of a series, and hopefully start to explore some of the weirder and more sort of obscure rites and orders that are out there on offer for people. So again, thank you very much, and I'll throw us back to Rob.
Thanks, Kane. You've done an excellent job. Kane put the night together today for us, and he's going to put all the other ones together in the coming months, Kane. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to have a lot of orders to join. Although even if I join all the ones we present on, I'm sure I won't join as many as Jacques has. Anyway, look, it's been fantastic to have everyone along today. I hope you all tell your friends and come along to our next presentation. We've got another one coming up, I think the 18th of September, on some Masonic interesting facts about Washington, D.C. Keep an eye out for our new episode of our podcast, Brought to Light, coming out very soon as well. I encourage everyone to jump onto our Facebook page and like that and follow that. And I think there's some way to follow it. And so you get all of the updates about our upcoming events. But again, thank you for supporting the Blue Lounge Social Club and what we are trying to do for younger and newer Freemasons, and really for all Freemasons in connecting people together and trying to ensure the future of Freemasonry. Well, that's all we've got today for everyone. Again, thank you very much.